The ceramic pieces lay scattered across the hardwood floor like silent reminders of something broken. Amid the spilled soil from the overturned pot, a glint of metal reflected the afternoon light pouring through our living room window. My breath caught resting in the dirt were a brass key with a safety deposit tag, a micro SD card wrapped in plastic, and a folded note unmistakably written in my father's handwriting. I sank to my knees, forgetting the rag in my hand, as 23 years of marriage suddenly felt like decades of living with a stranger. Before we go on, let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. We love hearing from our global family. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share more real-life stories of betrayal and justice. My name is Eileen Kyler Francisco. Until that Thursday afternoon in March, I thought I knew my husband. I trusted in the life we'd built together, in the quiet suburban home that felt safe, in the man who kissed my forehead each morning and called me sweetheart in front of friends. I believed the cracks in our marriage were normal, that every couple faced challenges, that love was about enduring the small dismissals and the gradual loss of self that had become my daily reality. At 47, I realized I had spent the past decade walking on eggshells in my own home. It started subtly, almost unnoticeable. Rick had always been particular. His coffee mug needed washing a certain way, his newspaper folded just right, his cherished ficus positioned exactly 3 feet from the south-facing window. But over time, his preferences hardened into rules, his suggestions became demands, and my opinions were treated as inconveniences. Eileen, you're too sensitive, became his standard response whenever I voiced concern. You're imagining things, he'd say with a patient smile that left me questioning my sanity. You know how you get when you're stressed. That stress, as he called it, was simply me recognizing reality. The gaslighting was so precise, so consistent, that I began doubting my own judgment. When I said he felt distant, he'd list ways he showed affection, the flowers he brought home always after a cruel remark, the dinners where he spent the evening on his phone, the weekend getaways where he'd vanish for hours, claiming he needed space. Our daughter, Angel, now 23, and freshly graduated from college, had started noticing. During her last visits, she quietly observed how Rick dismissed my comments, corrected my stories in public, and made social plans without asking me. Mom, she said gently, one evening, you don't have to agree with everything he says. You're allowed your own thoughts. The fact that my daughter needed to remind me of something so basic should have woken me up. Instead, I excused it, as I always did. Your father's just particular, honey. Marriage is compromise. But the pity in her eyes stayed with me. For weeks, Rick's family never made life easier. His mother, Cecilia, carried herself like a steel magnolia with a tongue that cut deep. She never missed a chance to critique my housekeeping, my cooking, my parenting, or my work. Rick worked so hard, she'd sigh whenever I admitted feeling overwhelmed. The least you can do is keep his home in order. His brother Desmond was worse, a bully who masked cruelty behind humor. He'd mock my appearance, intelligence, or worth, always ending with just kidding. Rick often wore the same smirk while correcting me. Together, the brothers turned family gatherings into competitions to see who could undermine me most. The only support I had was Tamara, Desmond's wife. She'd joined the family dysfunction 5 years earlier and saw it clearly for what it was. Across the dinner table, she'd offered me small gestures of solidarity and understanding glance, a quick escape to the kitchen where we could breathe. For a moment, they're not normal, Eileen, she whispered last Christmas, as we washed dishes, listening to Desmond berate their son in the next room. The way they treat women, it's not okay. But Tamra was trapped too, with 2 young children and a husband who controlled all their finances. We were both drowning, just in different waters. The morning the ficus pot broke started like any other. Rick left for work with his routine kiss and the usual list of tasks. His mother was visiting that weekend. Groceries had to match his detailed list, and his study needed dusting. With everything returned exactly to its place. Since Angel left for college, I'd been freelancing as a graphic designer, trying to rebuild the career I once set aside. Rick tolerated it only if it didn't interfere with my household duties, and never earned me more success than he was comfortable with. Whenever a client relationship grew stronger, Rick suddenly demanded more of my time, pulling me back into his orbit. That morning, I was dusting around his precious ficus, a plant he'd had since before we met, which he deemed irreplaceable and strictly forbidden to be moved. My phone rang. It was Angel, calling from Portland, where she worked at a nonprofit and lived a life of independence I'd nearly forgotten was possible. "Hey, Mom," she said warmly, though I could hear concern. "I've been thinking about what you shared last week. Maybe talking to someone, a therapist." I'd admitted, in a rare moment of weakness, that I felt lost, as if I no longer recognized myself. Angel immediately suggested counseling. But the thought terrified me. What if therapy confirmed what I was starting to fear, that I had wasted years of my life, that I had become a shadow of who I once was? "I don't know, honey," I replied, stretching the phone cord as I reached to dust behind the ficus. "Your father thinks therapy is just an excuse for people who can't handle their problems." "Mom," Angel said sharply, "who cares what Dad thinks? This is about you, what you need." The idea that my needs could actually matter and even come before Rick's opinions felt so strange that I laughed. But it wasn't real laughter, more like a bitter sound. As I turned to answer Angel, my elbow hit the edge of the ficus pot. Time seemed to slow as 23 years of quiet compliance shattered across the hardwood. The plant lay on its side, roots exposed, as unsettled and vulnerable as I felt most days. Mom, what was that noise?" Angel's voice sounded distant. I barely heard her. My eyes were fixed on the mess, already calculating how much trouble I was in when I noticed them 3 objects buried in the soil, like hidden truths finally surfacing. "I'll have to call you back," I whispered, ending the call before she could reply. My hands shook as I lifted the first object, a small brass key. It looked like the kind used for safety deposit boxes, with a tag showing numbers I didn't recognize and a bank logo from across town. A bank we had no accounts with, at least as far as I knew. The second item was a micro SD card, carefully wrapped in plastic to keep it safe from dirt and moisture. Whoever placed it there had wanted to preserve it, but it was the third object that froze my blood. A photocopy of a letter in my father's unmistakable handwriting, the same careful script he'd used on birthday cards, notes, and his final letter before he passed 3 years ago. This one was addressed to Rick, dated just 2 months before my father's death. It began, "Rick, I'm writing to confirm our discussion about Eileen's inheritance and the foundation we discussed establishing in my name." I read it 3 times before the meaning fully sank in. My father, who had fought cancer for years and worried constantly about my financial security, had entrusted Rick with plans I'd never known about. According to the letter, he'd left a significant sum of money I never even knew existed to start a charitable foundation in his memory. It was to support cancer research and patient care, causes close to his heart. Rick was named to manage the foundation, but it was to be created in my name, as his only child. Yet, in 3 years, I had heard nothing. The letter detailed account, numbers, legal steps, meetings with lawyers, tax considerations, all entrusted to Rick so I wouldn't be burdened while grieving. My father believed his legacy would live on through this work. All the while I believed he'd left me nothing but keepsakes and memories. So where was the money? Where was the foundation? Where were the documents? And why had Rick hidden this letter in a plant pot like buried treasure? I sat on the floor, surrounded by broken ceramic and dirt, holding my father's words, and something inside me cracked open. It wasn't grief this time. It was rage. Clear, sharp rage I hadn't let myself feel in years. Rick had stolen my father's last gift. To me, he had stolen my father's legacy, his hope to make a difference, and his trust in the man he believed was protecting his daughter. But this was only the beginning. I carefully unwrapped the SD card and slid it into my laptop. My hands were steadier now, driven by a fury that felt almost unfamiliar after years of suppressing emotions. The card held dozens of files, photos, documents, audio recordings, and a meticulous log of dates and activities. The first folder contained surveillance photos of me leaving the house, grocery shopping, meeting Tamara for coffee, working in my office, all taken with a telephoto lens, all showing I'd been watched for months, maybe years. The timestamps matched times when Rick had claimed he was at work, in meetings, or with clients. My husband had been stalking me, but I wasn't the only subject. There were photos of Angel outside her apartment, at work, near her favorite cafe. Pictures Rick couldn't have taken himself, which meant he'd hired someone to follow our daughter. My confusion grew as I opened the audio files. They were worse. Recordings of my private phone calls with Angel, with Tamara, with the few friends I still had. Conversations I thought were safe inside my own home. In one file, I heard myself confide to Angel that I felt trapped. questioning whether staying in the marriage had been a mistake. In another, I told Tamara about Rick's controlling ways and how he made me feel small. Rick had been gathering evidence, building a case against me as if I were a criminal in my own life. The documents folder confirmed it. Divorce papers already filled out, leaving me with nearly nothing. A custody agreement granting Rick rights over Angel, even though she was 23 and independent. Restraining order applications accusing me of being unstable and dangerous. And worst of all, a psychiatric evaluation with my name on it, signed by a doctor I'd never met, dated just 2 weeks earlier. It claimed I suffered from paranoia, depression, and emotional instability. Rick had been preparing to strip away everything: my father's inheritance, my daughter, my freedom, while labeling me mentally unfit. I sat there staring at the evidence of betrayal, the sunlight shifting across the broken pot, and for the first time in decades, I saw my life clearly. Every fight, every moment, he made me doubt myself. Every time I felt too sensitive, it had all been deliberate. He had been dismantling my confidence, my relationships, and my reality, step by step, until he could leave me powerless. The cruelest part was that he had done it using my father's trust. My father, who had loved me unconditionally, who had worried for my future, who believed Rick would care for me when he no longer could. Instead, Rick betrayed him. I thought back to those final weeks, my father's quiet relief, his reassurances, not to worry about money because Rick would handle things. I had assumed he meant support and guidance. I never realized he had left me an inheritance and that Rick had been plotting to steal it from the moment my father died. The rage inside me hardened into something sharper, more focused. This was no longer only about money. It was about truth, betrayal, and taking back what had been stolen. This wasn't just about MIT, was about honoring my father's memory, the good he wanted to leave behind, and the trust he placed in someone who never deserved it. Rick believed he was clever, meticulous, and that I was too fragile, too dependent, too afraid to resist. He was about to learn otherwise. I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting every detail. I photographed documents, copied files, and created a timeline with precise notes. Research confirmed that the bank listed on the safety deposit records was real, and the box had been opened 3 years ago, right after my father's death. For the first time in years, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, my cousin, Georgina Kyler, a family law attorney who had been reaching out to reconnect. Rick had discouraged contact with her for years, saying she was too forceful, too disruptive. Now, I understood he feared someone who could see through his manipulation. When Georgina answered, her surprise quickly shifted to warmth. "It's been so long. How are you?" "I need help," I said. "I think my husband has been planning to declare me mentally unfit so he can take my inheritance." There was a pause, then her voice turned sharp, professional. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm home. He's at work. I've found a lot: documents, recordings, forged papers, years of planning." "Don't touch anything else," she ordered. "Leave everything as it is. I'm coming over with a colleague who specializes in financial fraud. We'll handle this properly and then we'll bring him down." Her protectiveness caught me off guard. I realized how long it had been since anyone had stood firmly on my side. I broke down, sobbing, years of fear, grief, and exhaustion finally spilling out. "Eileen," Georgina said gently, "you're going to be okay. But right now, I need you to do one thing. Call Angel, warn her." The thought of my daughter being in danger because of Rick's schemes ignited a fresh wave of anger. He was supposed to protect her, not threaten her. I called immediately. "Mom, you sound upset. What happened?" "Angel, listen carefully. Your father has been having you followed. He has photos of you at work and near your apartment. He's planning to file for custody even though you're an adult. You need to stay alert and come home." The silence on the line felt endless. "Mom," Angel finally said, voice tight, "are you saying Dad has been stalking me?" "Yes, and me. He's been recording our calls. He stole the money Grandpa left for us, the money meant for cancer research. He's been trying to paint me as unstable." "I'm leaving now," Angel interrupted. "I'll be there in 5 hours. Do not confront him. Pretend everything is normal until I get there." It should have humiliated me to take safety instructions from my 23-year-old daughter, but instead it felt like strength. "Georgina is coming with another lawyer," I reassured her. "Good, Mom. I'm so sorry. I should have done more. I should have made you leave him years ago." "This isn't your fault," I told her. "It's not yours either. Remember that." Within an hour, Georgina arrived with Dr. Vance, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial abuse. They quickly took control. First, we document everything, Georgina said, putting on gloves. Vance set up professional equipment while I explained how I'd discovered the evidence. Each document was photographed, bagged, and cataloged. Files were copied and verified. The safety deposit key was traced back to its origin. This is extensive, Dr. Vance said grimly. Your husband has been preparing this for at least 3 years. The forgeries, surveillance, psychiatric evaluation, this was designed to strip you of control and take your assets. Georgina scanned the draft divorce papers. These terms are outrageous. He's claiming you're unstable and irresponsible while demanding full control of marital and premarital assets. Did you ever give him power of attorney? No. At least I don't think so. He always handled the paperwork. Said it was easier. The look Georgina exchanged with Vance unsettled me. We'll check, Georgina said. If he forged your signature, that's a felony. But first, we need to secure your father's inheritance. Dr. Vance pulled up bank records. The box was opened 2 weeks after your father's death and accessed monthly. Since then, the latest was last week. We won't know what's inside until we open it, but I suspect the original will, foundation documents, and evidence of where the money went. Georgina stood, brushing dirt from her hands. Eileen, we're going to the bank now. You'll use that key. We need to see exactly what he's hiding. But what if he finds out? What if he notices the broken pot? We'll cover it, Dr. Vance said. You'll tell him you broke it, apologize, and say you ordered a replacement. Act like the wife he expects for now. The thought of pretending again made me sick, but I understood. We needed time to build a case and secure the truth. How long? I asked. A few days, maybe a week, Georgina said. Just enough to lock everything down, and then we'll end this for good. The safety deposit box contained a wealth of evidence that revealed the full extent of Rick's betrayal. Inside was my father's original will along with a letter of instruction, leaving no doubt about his true intentions. He had set aside $800,000 for my money from the sale of his house, his life insurance, and his long-term investments. Those funds were meant to establish the Maximiliano Keiler Foundation for Cancer Research and Patient Advocacy, with me serving as both administrator and beneficiary. There were also unfiled legal papers that should have formally created the foundation and transferred authority to me. Instead, Rick had redirected the funds into accounts under his own name, using forged power of attorney documents that carried my falsified signature. But the most disturbing find was a folder marked insurance policies. It contained large life insurance policies Rick had taken out on both Angel and me without our knowledge just 6 months earlier. He's been planning to destroy us, I whispered, staring at the documents. Not necessarily, Dr. Vance replied carefully, but he's certainly been preparing for the possibility of your deaths. Combined with the psychiatric evaluation and custody papers, this suggests he had multiple plans depending on whether he could declare you incompetent or if you resisted. Georgina, working with cold efficiency, photographed everything. Eileen, this is more than enough to put him away for a very long time. Fraud, forgery, identity theft, financial exploitation, and potentially conspiracy, or even attempted murder, depending on what else we uncover. I don't just want him in prison, I admitted, surprising myself. Of course I want him punished, but prison would be too simple. He'd twist it. Become the victim. His family would rally behind him, blaming me. Georgina studied me, with something like pride. Then what do you want, Eileen? I thought of my father, and the work he had wanted his foundation to accomplish. I thought of Angel's fear when she realized she'd been stalked, of Tamara's suffocating marriage, and of the many others who might fall prey to Rick's manipulation. I want him exposed, I said firmly. I want everyone, his family, friends, co-workers, to see the truth. I want the foundation created exactly as my father intended. And I want Rick stripped of everything: his reputation, career, respect, his false sense of control. I want him humiliated, the way he's humiliated me for 23 years. Georgina's smile was fierce. That, we can arrange. That evening, Angel arrived just as Rick pulled into the driveway. I had spent the afternoon cleaning, replacing the broken pot online, and rehearsing my act of nervous contrition. When Rick walked in, I was already apologizing. Rick, I'm so sorry. I was cleaning and accidentally knocked over your ficus. The pot broke, but the plant's fine. I've already ordered an identical replacement. I studied his reaction carefully, but he was so accustomed to my mistakes that he barely blinked. Where's the plant now? He asked with the tired patience of someone dealing with a careless child. In a temporary container, until the new pot arrives. Try to be more careful, Eileen. That pot was irreplaceable. If only he knew how irreplaceable it truly was, and what I'd uncovered because of it. Just then, Angel entered through the back door. Hi, Dad. Thought I'd surprise you. Rick's face brightened with genuine joy. Whatever else he was, he did care for Angel, or rather, for the image of her as his accomplished daughter. He had no idea she was here to help me bring him down. Angel, what a wonderful surprise. How long will you stay? Just a few days. I want to spend some time with Mom, maybe help her with some things around the house. Over dinner, we played our roles, seamlessly chatting about Angel's work and friends while Rick basked in the illusion of being the center of our world. He didn't realize his wife and daughter were plotting his downfall between polite exchanges. At the table. That night, once Rick was asleep, Angel and I whispered in the kitchen. Georgina thinks we need to act quickly, I said. The longer we wait, the more likely he discovers what we know. What about Tamara, his mother, and Desmond? Do we warn them? I considered Cecilia's cruelty, Desmond's bullying, and the way they all contributed to my years of feeling diminished. Tamara deserves to know what she married into. But the rest will find out, along with everyone else. Angel nodded. And his job, his friends, everyone, I said. Everyone, whoever believed his lies, everyone who thought I was the problem, they'll all know the truth. The next morning, while Rick was at work, Georgina returned with a team of investigators and forensic accountants. We had only 24 hours to gather everything we could before acting. What they uncovered went far beyond what I had expected. Rick's computer held years of communication with private investigators, documenting surveillance not just on me and Angel, but also background checks on friends and family who might support me. He had spent years dismantling my support network. Even worse, there were emails with Desmond, discussing how best to manage both Tamara and me. Desmond would test manipulative tactics on his wife, which Rick then applied to me. Most incriminating of all, they found records of payments to the doctor who had signed the falsified psychiatric evaluation. He had been fabricating medical records for Rick not only about me, but also about other women. Eileen, Georgina said, her voice tight with anger, your husband and his brother are running a criminal operation systematically abusing women, seizing their assets, and covering it up with forged medical reports. You're far from their first victim. The truth struck hard. For years I had believed I was the problem, too sensitive, too difficult, when in fact I had been targeted by a calculated scheme. How many others? I asked quietly. We're still investigating, but at least 3 women over the past decade. Each was forced into divorce, declared mentally unstable, stripped of everything. They live in poverty now, while their ex-husbands control their wealth. I thought of those women, of their ruined lives, of how they must have blamed themselves. We'll help them too, I said. When we expose Rick and Desmond, we'll make sure those women get justice as well. Georgina smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. For the next 2 days, we built an airtight case. Georgina worked directly with prosecutors, preparing the charges that would finally bring Rick and Desmond down. Dr. Vance tracked every dollar of my father's stolen inheritance and located the accounts where Rick had hidden the money. Investigators collected evidence of the surveillance, forged papers, and his scheme with Desmond. Mimo, I played my role without Flotha, apologetic wife, worried over a broken pot. Grateful for Rick's supposed patience with my clumsiness, I cooked his favorite meals, asked about his day, and gave him no reason to think anything had changed. It felt almost unreal that he completely forgot what he had hidden inside that plant pot. I was changing. Each polite smile, each submissive gesture, every moment of pretending to be the woman he expected, all of it became my shield while I prepared for the fight ahead. Angel was remarkable. She talked with her father about her job, her friends, her future plans, all while secretly recording him and collecting more evidence, believing he had his daughter's admiration. Rick revealed more than he ever would have if he'd known she was working against him. On Thursday night, Tamara came over for dinner. Rick, as always when guests were around, played the role of devoted husband and father. But now Tamara knew what signs to notice, and I could see her registering every small insult, every attempt at control, every sign of abuse she hadn't been able to recognize in her own marriage. After dinner, while Rick was in his study, Tamara, Angel, and I sat together in the living room, and I told her everything. She listened in silence as I explained the evidence, the conspiracy with Desmond, the stolen inheritance, and the other victims. When I finished, she was in tears. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered. "Desmond's been controlling, paranoid about money and my movements. He's been asking about my family's inheritance and pressuring me to sign papers he says are for estate planning." "Don't sign anything," Angel warned. "And Tamara, you need to get out tonight if you can." "I can't. The kids, they'll help you," I said firmly. "Georgina has resources, safe houses, legal support. You don't have to face this alone." Tamara looked at me in disbelief. "You're really going to destroy them, aren't you?" "I'm going to expose them," I corrected. "Everyone will know exactly who they are and what they've done. Then I'll use my father's money, as he intended to help people, to turn all this harm into something good." By Friday morning, Georgina called with the update I'd been waiting for. "Everything is ready. The prosecutors will file charges today. The bank has frozen Rick's accounts. The insurance companies have been alerted about the fraudulent policies. I've also prepared a complete dossier for his employer, his professional network, and his social circles." "What about the media?" I asked. "I've spoken to a journalist who specializes in financial fraud. She's interested in the case, especially the angle about stolen charity money and multiple victims." I took a steady breath. "Then, let's move forward. Eileen, once this begins, there's no turning back. Are you ready?" I thought of my father and the foundation he wanted to build. I thought of the women Rick and Desmond had hurt, of Angel who deserved freedom, of Tamara and her children who still had a chance to escape. "I'm ready." "Then it starts in 1 hour. Rick will be arrested at his office, Desmond at his home. The news will break by evening. By tomorrow morning, their entire world will know the truth." After hanging up, I sat in the living room, staring at the spot where I'd broken the ficus pot only a week earlier. The new pot had arrived, and the plant was thriving in its temporary container. Soon I would replant it, but I would never again fear breaking Rick's possessions. Angel joined me, watching quietly. "How do you feel, Mom?" "Powerful," I said, and realized it was true. For the first time in 23 years, I felt powerful. At 2 p.m. that Friday, the arrests took place. Rick was taken from his office in front of colleagues and clients, charged with fraud, forgery, identity theft, conspiracy, and financial abuse. The charges were read in the lobby of his prestigious firm, where he had built his image as a model family man. Desmond was arrested at his home, where Tamara had already left with her children and a suitcase of evidence taken from his office. The arresting officer later said the look on his face when he realized his wife had outsmarted him was unforgettable. Though I wasn't present, Georgina kept me updated all afternoon. By 3 p.m., both men were in custody, their assets frozen, and the investigation into their other victims was officially underway. By 6 p.m., the local news led with the headline, "Insurance executive and brother charged in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme targeting wives and elderly victims." Angel and I sat together, holding hands on the couch where I had once lived in fear. The reporter, Loretta Dominic, presented the charges, along with details of the stolen charity funds, the abuse patterns, and the victims' stories. Maximiliano Kyler, who died of cancer 3 years ago, left $800,000 to establish a research foundation, Dominic reported. Instead, his son-in-law is accused of stealing the funds and using forged documents to declare his wife mentally unfit. Tonight, that wife speaks out. The camera cut to an interview Georgina had arranged earlier. I hardly recognized myself, on-screen confident, clear, and angry in the right way. "My father battled cancer for 2 years, I said in the interview. He spent his final months planning a legacy to help families facing the same fight. My husband stole that legacy, betrayed my father's trust, and spent 3 years convincing me I was losing my mind. But the only thing I lost was my fear of him." The segment included insights from Dr. Vance on the fraud, Georgina on the legal case, and a prosecutor promising that this was only the beginning of a larger investigation. But the strongest moment came when Dominic asked me what I planned next. "I'm going to establish my father's foundation, exactly as he intended," I said, looking straight into the camera. "The Maximiliano Kyler Foundation will fund cancer research, patient advocacy, and resources for women escaping financial abuse. My father wanted to help people, and that's what we'll do. The phone began ringing before the broadcast had even finished. The first call came from Cecilia, Rick's mother, shouting that I had ruined her son's life and demanding I fix everything immediately. I let her vent for half a minute before hanging up. For the first time in 23 years, I no longer cared what Cecilia Francisco thought. The second call was from Rick, phoning from jail. "Eileen, you have to listen to me," he pleaded, his usual arrogance gone. "This is all a misunderstanding. The documents, the surveillance, I was trying to protect you. You've been unstable, paranoid. I was gathering proof so I could get you help." Even when caught with undeniable evidence, he was still trying to gaslight me. "Rick," I said evenly, "listen carefully. I know about the other women. I know about the forged psychiatric reports. I know about the life insurance policies on me and Angel. I know about the scheme with Desmond. I know everything." There was silence. "The only unstable person in this marriage was you," I continued. "You're a criminal, a predator, and a disgrace. And now the world knows it. Don't ever call me again. Don't contact Angel. Don't reach out to my family. From now on, your lawyer speaks only to mine." I hung up and blocked his number. The third call was from an unfamiliar voice. "Is this Eileen Francisco, the woman from the news?" "Yes, my name is Linda Amir. I think my husband did to me what yours did to you." My heart tightened. "Tell me." Her story mirrored mine. 5 years earlier, Linda had married Desmond's business partner. Step by step, he cut her off from friends and family, convinced others she was mentally unstable, and eventually had her committed to a psychiatric facility against her will. While she was institutionalized, he divorced her and seized control of her assets, including her grandmother's inheritance. "I've lived in a tiny apartment, working minimum wage jobs for 3 years," she said, her voice trembling. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy. My own family won't speak to me. But when I saw your story, when I heard about forged psychiatric evaluations, Linda," I said firmly, "you are not crazy. You were victimized by criminals. We're going to help you reclaim your life." By night's end, 6 more women had called with similar accounts. Georgina had been right. Rick and Desmond were running a criminal network, and we had only uncovered part of it. The weekend unleashed a media storm. The story went viral on social media, reached national news outlets, and ignited discussions about financial abuse, gaslighting, and how women in controlling marriages are left vulnerable. Hashtags like #justice, #financial abuse, and #Max MILLIA, No Kyler Foundation, began trending. Most importantly, more victims stepped forward. By Monday, Georgina's office had been contacted by 12 women, describing nearly identical patterns of abuse, isolation, manipulation, financial control, then legal action to strip them of assets and credibility. Prosecutors widened the investigation, and federal authorities stepped in once they grasped the scale. Rick and Desmond hadn't only exploited their own wives, they had built a system involving corrupt doctors, complicit lawyers, and private investigators who specialized in fabricating evidence against vulnerable women. Meanwhile, Rick's mother Cecilia tried to defend her sons by calling me a manipulative ex-wife in media interviews, but her campaign collapsed when reporters uncovered that she had been receiving regular payments from Rick's fraudulent accounts, funds stolen from my father's inheritance. Public sympathy evaporated. Cecilia went from grieving mother to active accomplice, and the Francisco name became synonymous with betrayal. Desmond's wife Tamar emerged as a public figure in her own right. Her brave choice to collect evidence and escape with her children inspired others, and she began speaking on talk shows about financial abuse. She and I became close friends, united by shared experience and a mission to help other women. 3 months later, I stood in a downtown law firm's conference room with the other victims. We were there for the final settlement hearing, assets returned, damages awarded, and the foundation officially launched. Linda Amir sat beside me, along with 8 other women whose lives had been devastated. Some had lost homes, children, careers, years of their lives stolen. But today, they were reclaiming them. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, read the terms. Rick and Desmond would serve at least 15 years in federal prison. Their stolen wealth, with interest, would be returned. Corrupt doctors and lawyers faced their own criminal charges and lawsuits. Most importantly, the Maximiliano Kyler Foundation was being created with $2.3 million, my father's original $800,000 plus stolen funds, damages, and interest. Mrs. Francisco, the judge said, meeting my eyes, your father would be proud. This foundation will serve cancer patients and abuse survivors for generations. I thought of my father's last letter. He had trusted Rick, and he'd been wrong, but he was right about me. I was stronger than I realized. After the hearing, the women and I went to lunch. Trauma had bound us together, but now so had hope. Some chose to work with the foundation, using their experiences to guide other survivors. Angel joined us. Having traveled from Portland for the hearing, she had taken leave from work to help build the foundation and planned to move back home to work beside me. I'm proud of you, Mom, she said as we walked back to our cars. Not just for what happened to Dad, but for who you've become. You're no longer the same person you were months ago. He was right, the woman who once apologized for breaking a ficus pot was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who spoke up in meetings, made her own decisions, and took up space in the world without apology. 6 months after Rick's arrest, I received a letter from him in prison. At first, I nearly threw it away, but curiosity made me read it. 3 pages of self-pity and manipulation. He claimed he had only been trying to protect me, admitted to mistakes, but insisted he didn't deserve to lose everything. He accused me of being vindictive, cruel. The letter ended with a plea. Eileen, I know you're angry, but we had 23 years together. That must count for something. Please, forgive me. Help me appeal my sentence. Remember the good times. I'm still your husband. I still love you. I read it, waiting for anger, sadness, maybe guilt. But all I felt was distant pity for a man who never understood that love isn't control, marriage isn't ownership, and forgiveness isn't something to demand. I wrote back one sentence. I forgive you for my own peace, but I will never forget what you did, and I will never stop working to ensure you can't hurt anyone else. Then, I filed for divorce. A year later, I stood in the lobby of the Maximiliano Kyler Foundation's new offices, watching Angel hang a portrait of my father on the wall. The foundation had already funded research, built a support network for survivors, and helped dozens of women escape controlling relationships. Rick's prized ficus plant sat near the reception desk, thriving in a pot I had chosen myself. It had become a symbol of resilience, proof that something uprooted could be replanted and grow stronger. That afternoon, Tamara visited with her children, thriving in their new life. She was dating a kind partner and working on a book about financial abuse. She asked me quietly, "Do you ever regret it? Ending your marriage, starting over at 47, I thought carefully. My life was different now, smaller in some ways, but larger in others. I lived in a modest apartment instead of a big house, but it was mine. I had less money, but I controlled every penny. I was single for the first time in decades, yet I was learning to enjoy my own company. I didn't destroy my marriage," I said. I revealed it. The marriage I thought I had never really existed. It was just an act to keep me compliant. What I have now is real. It's mine, and it's better than anything I had before. That evening, Angel and I had dinner at my apartment. She had chosen to stay in town, working with the foundation and building her own life. We'd grown closer than ever, not just mother and daughter, but 2 women who had survived and chosen to help others. Mom, Angel said while we cleaned the dishes. I've been thinking about changing my name. I don't want to be Angel Francisco anymore. I want to be Angel Kyler, like you will be once the divorce is final. I paused, surprised. Are you sure? I'm sure. Francisco was never really mine. It came from a man who turned out to be a criminal. Kyler is my heritage, my choice, and the name I want connected to helping people, not hurting them. I hugged her, proud of this strong young woman who had stood with me when it mattered most. 2 years later, I spoke at a conference on domestic abuse and financial fraud. The audience was filled with lawyers, social workers, law enforcement, and survivors. I told them about the ficus pot, the moment when my controlled life cracked open and revealed the truth. I spoke about believing women when they say something feels wrong, even if they can't yet explain why. I described the signs of financial abuse, the tactics of gaslighting, and how predators misuse institutions to reinforce their control. But most of all, I spoke about transformation. For 23 years, I believed I was weak. I told them. I thought I was too dependent, too emotional, to survive alone. My husband and his family fed that belief daily, in ways that made me doubt myself. But here's the truth. The strength was always there. The intelligence, the courage, the independence was always mine, buried under years of conditioning. Breaking that ficus pot didn't just expose my husband's crimes, it revealed my own power. And once I chose to use it, there was nothing he could do to stop me. 5 years after Rick's arrest, the Maximiliano Keiler Foundation was nationally recognized. We'd helped hundreds of survivors, funded research, and lobbied for new laws that made financial abuse easier to prosecute. Rick and Desmond remained in prison, their appeals repeatedly denied. Others in their network had been convicted, and copycat operations had been shut down. I never remarried. I dated occasionally, but discovered I enjoyed being single, making decisions without seeking approval, and living in peace. Angel often joked that I had become aggressively independent, and she wasn't wrong. Still, I had learned to trust again, to form real friendships, and to accept help when needed. The foundation connected me to a community of survivors and advocates, people who understood the journey from victim to survivor to leader. On the 5th anniversary of breaking the ficus pot, we held a party, not to celebrate my divorce or Rick's imprisonment, but to honor the foundation, the lives we'd helped, and the future we were building. The room was filled with photos of projects and people we had supported. Tamara was there with her husband and family, Linda Amir now working as our financial counselor, Georgina, my lawyer turned close friend, and Angel, recently promoted to executive director, and in the corner, still thriving, was the ficus plant that started it all. Looking around, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not a perfect ending, but the kind of resolution that comes from turning pain into purpose. Dr. Vance handed me a glass of champagne and said, "Eileen, I have news I think you'll appreciate. Remember Dr. Harrison, the psychiatrist who wrote Your False Evaluation?" I nodded. He had been one of the last to face sentencing. His medical license was officially revoked today. He'll never practice again, and he's facing lawsuits from every woman he harmed. The board cited your case as an example of how the system failed to protect patients. The news didn't feel like victory, it felt like justice. Quiet, inevitable, and long overdue. As the evening wound down, Angel found me standing by the window, gazing at the city lights. "Penny, for your thoughts, Mum." "I was thinking about your grandfather," I said. "He would have loved this, not the drama or the pain, but the foundation, the work we're doing, and the people we're helping. He always believed that good could rise from hardship if you were willing to put in the effort." Angel slipped her arm through mine. "He'd be proud of you, not just for surviving, Mom, but for what you've built since. You turned his stolen legacy into something even greater than he imagined." She was right. The foundation had grown far beyond my father's original vision of cancer research. We now offered programs for survivors of financial abuse, legal advocacy, emergency housing, and educational workshops that taught young people how to recognize controlling relationships. "Mom," Angel said softly, "can I ask you something I've always wondered?" "Of course. Do you think Dad ever truly loved you, or was it all manipulation from the start?" I had asked myself that question countless times during therapy, in quiet moments, and in sleepless nights when the weight of his betrayal struck me all over again. "I think he loved the idea of me," I said finally. "He loved having a wife who made him look good, who didn't challenge him, who made his life easier. But real love means seeing someone for who they truly are, and wanting their happiness, even when it doesn't serve you. Rick never saw me as a whole person with needs and dreams of my own. I was just a character in his story. And now, I'm the protagonist of my own story. And it's far better than the one he was writing for me." Later that night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my apartment with a cup of tea and a photo album I'd been putting together. Pictures from the past 5 years told not only the story of the foundation but also of my own transformation. There was a photo from my first TV interview where I looked nervous but determined. Pictures from events where I slowly appeared more confident, more at ease in my own skin. Photos with Angel, with Tamara, and with the other survivors who had become like sisters in healing. On the final page was a picture Angel had taken that very morning, me standing next to the new plant, both of us thriving in our environment. I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago, the one who apologized for existing, who tied her worth to her husband's approval, who believed peace mattered more than dignity. That woman felt like a stranger now. I remembered her with compassion, but I hardly recognized her. The change hadn't come easily. There were nights when I questioned everything, when loneliness felt unbearable. when I feared I'd made a mistake in tearing my life apart, times when Rick's voice in my head drowned out my own, making me believe I was truly unlovable, vindictive, even unstable. But those moments had grown fewer, replaced by a deepening sense of worth, strength, and the ability to find joy. I picked up my phone and scrolled through messages from the day, congratulations from colleagues, updates from women we'd helped, family vacation photos from Tamara, and a funny meme from Georgina. The next morning, I rose early and drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. Since starting the foundation, I had made it a ritual to visit him, updating him on our progress, the lives we'd changed, and the challenges we faced. "Hi, Dad," I said, settling cross-legged on the grass beside his headstone. "I brought you the annual report." I opened the folder and read him the statistics: the women who escaped abuse, the cancer patients we supported, the funds we recovered for fraud victims, the research we'd financed, the laws we'd helped influence. "But numbers don't tell the whole story," I continued. "Yesterday, a woman named Lynn Du, remember her? One of Desmond's victims told me she's getting married next month, to a man who treats her as an equal, who celebrates her strength instead of trying to diminish it. She once told me she never believed she'd trust anyone again, but the foundation taught her to trust herself first." I paused, watching a butterfly land on the flowers I had brought. "And Dad, you'd be so proud of Angel. She's become a strong advocate, a protector of vulnerable people. She's everything I hoped for, only braver and stronger than I imagined. She chose to stand and fight with me instead of running from the chaos. That choice shaped her into the woman she was meant to be." The morning was calm, peaceful in a way my life rarely was during marriage. No one questioned my choices, monitored my time, or made me feel guilty for resting. "I know you trusted Rick to care for me," I whispered, "and I know you'd feel awful about how wrong you were. But Dad, in a strange way, his betrayal became the best thing that happened to me. It forced me to find my strength, to uncover who I truly was beneath years of control. I'm not the same person you worried about. I'm someone you'd be proud to call your daughter." As I rose to leave, I noticed fresh flowers on the grave beside my father's, an elderly woman who had passed just months ago. The blooms had clearly been placed by someone still grieving, still honoring her memory. And I realized this was real love, not the controlling devotion I mistook for love in marriage, but care that asked nothing in return. That afternoon, I met Georgina for lunch to review the foundation's expansion. We were planning satellite offices in other cities to reach more women in need. "Eileen," she said while scanning the budget, "I need to ask you something honestly. Are you happy? Not just proud of the work, but genuinely happy?" I thought about it. During my marriage, happiness felt so foreign I'd nearly forgotten I was allowed to want it. "Yes," I answered, surprised by my own certainty. "I am happy, not in the perfect house, perfect marriage way I once imagined, but in a better way. I have authenticity, purpose, relationships built on respect, not fear. I have the freedom to choose even when I choose wrong." Georgina smiled. "That's the best kind of happiness, the kind you create for yourself." "You know what's funny?" I added. "Rick always said I'd never survive without him, that I was too dependent to stand alone. He believed controlling me was doing me a favor. But I was never weak. I was just exhausted from constantly resisting the one person who should have been on my side. Once I stopped wasting energy fighting him and used my strength for myself, I realized there was no limit to what I could do." 6 months later, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at a state prison conference on domestic violence prevention. The audience included officers, social workers, and inmates in rehabilitation programs. Rick would be there. I nearly declined. The thought of facing the man who stole so many years filled me with anxiety. But I thought of women, still trapped, still believing their abusers' lies. If my story reached even one of them, it would be worth it. On the day of the conference, Angel offered to join me, but I declined. This was something I had to do alone. A final step in closing the circle. The prison looked exactly as expected, designed for containment, but the conference room held people genuinely seeking change, and that gave me hope. I told my story, as always. Honestly, I spoke of the ficus pot, the moment my world shattered, and the long process of rebuilding trust in myself, and I spoke about forgiveness, not to excuse, but to free myself from carrying someone else's poison. When I finished, silence filled the room, until a corrections officer asked, "Mrs. Kyler, How do you respond to people who say women like you should have left sooner, or seen the signs? It was a familiar question, and it always angered me. I respond, I said firmly, by reminding them that abusers are skilled manipulators. They don't begin by showing control. They start with overwhelming affection, making it feel like the greatest love story ever told. Slowly, they introduce controls, so gradually that victims don't notice until they're isolated and dependent. Asking why a woman didn't leave sooner is like asking why a frog doesn't jump from slowly boiling water. By the time danger is clear, you've been conditioned to believe survival outside isn't possible. After the session, during the meet and greet, I felt someone approach. Turning, I came face to face with Rick for the first time in 5 years. He looked older, grayer, diminished, but his eyes still carried that calculating look, searching for advantage. "Eileen," he said quietly, "thank you for speaking to us." I studied him, searching for true remorse, but only saw the practiced charm he'd always used. "Rick," I replied evenly, "I've been learning about myself. Counseling helped me understand how I hurt you, an angel. I want you to know." Sorry. It sounded rehearsed, like therapy words, not real emotions. "I appreciate that," I said. "I hope it's helping you grow." He hesitated, then asked, "Do you think there's any chance for us in the future? I know I've done wrong, but we had 23 years. That has to count for something." There it was, the entitlement of our marriage, the belief that his needs should define my choices. "Rick," I said gently but firmly, "listen carefully. I forgive you because anger was destroying me. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't erase what happened, and it doesn't give you a second chance with me." His face shifted, the mask slipping to reveal anger. "I've built a life I love," I continued. "One rooted in honesty, respect, and equal partnership. I'll never trade that for the lies and control of our past, no matter how much therapy you've had. But Eileen, there is no but. This conversation is over. I wish you well, and hope you use this time to become someone who would never harm another woman. But that man, if he ever exists, will have to build relationships with people who don't know your history. I do, and I'll never forget." I walked away, lighter with each step. That evening, I called Angel. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I answered without hesitation. "Completely free. For years I wondered if I was too harsh, if I should be open to redemption. But seeing him today, hearing him try to manipulate me even here, confirmed I was right. I made the right choice." "I'm proud of you, Mom," Angel said. "You know the strangest part," I added. He looked small. Not physically, but diminished. All those years he seemed so powerful. But today, he looked like a sad man who threw away everything real for control. That's what bullies are underneath the surface: small, scared people who only feel big by making others feel small. After I hung up with Angel, I sat by the hotel window reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. 5 years earlier, I was the kind of woman who apologized for breaking a plant pot. Tonight, I was someone who had confronted her abuser and walked away with dignity intact. That transformation hadn't come overnight. It was built through countless small decisions, choosing to trust my own perspective, choosing to seek help, choosing to believe I deserved more, and choosing to use my pain to support others. A year later, I stood again in the same conference room where I'd once hosted the foundation's anniversary party, but this time, we were celebrating something even greater. The Maximiliano Keiler Foundation had just secured a $5 million grant from a major philanthropic group, funding that would allow us to expand services nationwide. But the real achievement was seen in the women whose lives had changed through our work. Linda Amir had graduated from law school and was joining our legal advocacy team. Tamara had published her book on financial abuse, which became a bestseller and was being adapted into a documentary. And Angel, my brilliant, determined daughter, had just accepted a position at the Department of Justice, leading a task force on financial crimes against women. She would be leaving the foundation, but her work would continue on a national stage. "I'm nervous about leaving," she admitted as we watched the celebration. "The foundation has been my entire world for the past 5 years. What if I can't make the same kind of impact in Washington?" "Angel," I said, holding her hands, "you're not leaving the work, you're expanding it. Everything you've learned here, every woman you've helped, every challenge you've faced, you'll take with you. And now, you'll be in a place where you can change laws, not just lives." She smiled, though I could still see her uncertainty. "And what about you? Will you be all right without me?" I'll be more than all right, I told her. I'll be proud. Your grandfather wanted to fight cancer. What we've built together fights something just as destructive, the cancer of abuse that eats away at women's souls. You're taking that fight to the highest levels of government. He would be proud of both of us. 5 months after Angel left for Washington, I received a call that brought everything full circle. Mrs. Kyler, this is Detective Caspian with the Portland Police. We believe we have a case connected to your past. My heart skipped. What kind of case? We've arrested a man named Thomas Francisco. He claims to be related to your ex-husband. He was running a financial fraud scheme against elderly women, using forged medical records to declare them incompetent. The methods match what your ex-husband and his brother once did. Rick's cousin. The family business was broader than we knew. What do you need from me? We'd like you to testify about the pattern of abuse. It would help establish this as part of a larger criminal network. There are 5 victims, elderly women, who lost their savings, homes, and independence. They need someone who understands. The next day, I was on a plane to Portland. The women I met were in their 70s and 80s, bright, dignified women who had been manipulated into believing they were losing their minds. The shame and confusion in their eyes was heartbreakingly familiar. Ladies, I told them in the district attorney's office, you are not crazy. You are not foolish. And this is not your fault. You were targeted by criminals who exploit trust and kindness, but we will help you rebuild your lives. And we did. Thomas Francisco was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The women regained most of their stolen assets, but more importantly, they regained their dignity. The best moment came 7 months later, when I received a letter from one of the victims, Dorothy Walsh, an 82-year-old former teacher. Dear Eileen, I wanted you to know, I've begun volunteering at our local domestic violence shelter, helping other women recognize signs of financial abuse. At my age, I thought my useful days were over, but you showed me that surviving something terrible can mark the beginning of the most meaningful work of your life. Thank you for giving me back my purpose. On the 10th anniversary of breaking the Ficus pot, I hosted one last celebration, not for the foundation that would continue long after me but for myself. A celebration of a life reclaimed, of purpose found, of a woman reborn. The gathering was small, held in my apartment, with the people who mattered most: Angel, home briefly from Washington, Tamara and her family, Georgina and her partner, Dr. Vance, and other women whose lives had crossed with mine in the shared journey from victims to survivors. At the center of the room sat the ficus plant, now enormous and thriving, a symbol in our community. The plant that had marked the beginning of truth. As the evening wound down, Angel found me standing by it. What are you thinking, Mom? I was thinking about the woman who broke this pot 10 years ago. How afraid she was, how small she felt, how certain she couldn't survive without someone else's approval. Do I miss her? No. I feel compassion for her. She did her best with what she knew. But she wasn't really me. She was just a version. I performed for so long, I forgot it wasn't real. Now I know who I am. I'm someone who breaks what needs breaking, who plants new growth in the soil of old lies, who turns pain into purpose. Angel hugged me tightly. You're someone who saved herself and then saved everyone else she could. Later, after everyone left, I sat alone with tea and a new photo album, not the old one from years past, but one filled with the last decade. Pictures of women we'd helped, laws we'd influenced, lives we'd touched. On the last page was a picture Angel had taken that night. Me standing beside the ficus, both of us grown stronger than anyone imagined. I thought of Rick, still in prison, convinced he was a victim of my cruelty instead of the author of his downfall. I thought of the women still trapped in relationships like the one I escaped. But mostly, I thought of the future of the Foundation's ongoing work, of Angel's influence in Washington, of all the women who would find their strength because we found ours first. The ficus rustled gently in the breeze from the open window, its leaves catching the last light of day. It had survived being broken, uprooted, and replanted and grown stronger for it, just like me. I picked up my phone and drafted a message for the Foundation's social media. 10 years ago, I broke my husband's ficus pot and discovered my life was built on lies. Tonight, I sit beside that same plant, now grown strong and thriving. Sometimes the greatest growth comes from the hardest breaks. To every woman who feels trapped, who doubts her strength, who believes she cannot survive, know this: you are more powerful than you realize. Break the pot, plant yourself in new soil, grow. Within minutes, responses poured in. Women shared stories of escape and transformation. Others asked for help. Some offered encouragement to those still trapped. I closed the laptop with a smile. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more lives to change. But tonight, I was simply a woman who had broken free and built something meaningful from the pieces. The ficus swayed gently in its pot, roots strong, always reaching for the light.